Good morning, good day, good evening, and good night, depending on when you're watching this. Okay, so today we're going to do a video on how to make roller guns. Well, a very basic one. I'm just going to try and give you the information of some different systems, and you can take it from there. There's a million variables. So today we're going to do two types. One of them is going to be with a small bore rubber, and one of them is going to be with a large bore 20mm standard everyday rubber that people use. This particular bridle you see me tying here is for the 20mm rubber, so it's got some big colossal knots, and your shooting cord and your catch cord woven together. That way it's very difficult for one to pull out of the other, and you can't just lose one from inside your rubber. Once you've tied the knot, it's a very basic knot, the figure of 8 you've seen me use before in some of the other videos. You burn the ends to make them quite thick and fat so that each individual strand can't go through. They're also woven back over the top of each other, so they shouldn't release from one from the other. For the 16mm, I'll quickly show you what we're going to use later, but it's just going to be those loops that you saw me use before in the how to small bore rubber video. Okay, so enjoy. I will have music playing in the background for when I'm not talking, so it's not completely boring for you, and hopefully you pick something up.
Are you working hard for a cause that you can't stand? Well, are you working hard for a cause that you can't stand? Then come on, all you workers, sing along with me. Yodeling.
And so here are the loops I was talking about. We're going to insert them into the small bore because the large knots and the bridles are too big, and hook our catch cord and shooting line up to those. Okay, we'll stop right there after the bridles have been made, and I'll quickly go through how I came to decide what length to make the rubbers. Okay, now, making this as basic as I can. A roller gun works under the simple premise that it takes your two rubber gun, which used to sit like this, and now moves them to either side of your gun instead. By doing this, you no longer have that bit of slack at the top, which was to a certain extent wasted power. I don't mind it, I prefer it, it's simpler, and it's pulling all the way through to the end of your rail. So the effective idea behind this is you're no longer losing, say, this much propulsion for the distance of your rail, which is why they say, we'll shoot further. It doesn't shoot further. It's just pulling further or giving you a greater draw for the overall length of your barrel. Now, how we use that to decide what length to now cut these rubbers, because it's slightly different, because you no longer have this little slack bit at the top. There's two ways to do this. The more usual way, and the rule of thumb way, I don't like that saying, but measure half your barrel length, so a quarter of your overall draw, and cut it at that, and then use pre-tension to adjust it until it is the right power for your gun. So you end up with your rubbers, say, stretching to here underneath the gun and all the way back on the top of the gun. Personally, I think this is total waste of power. Sorry, dog's misbehaving. Personally, I think it's a waste. You have this much potential elastic energy to use that you're not using. So what I do is, firstly, I try and work out what the elasticity of the rubber I'm using is and how much it can stretch. This particular rubber is still going to be elastic and pulling back against you up to 360, 380% from memory. I won't be pulling it that far purely because I'm only going to throw a 7mm shaft, so I don't need that much power. So what I'm aiming for is to have the length of rubber running all the way from the handle back through the rollers and back again. We'll call that your overall draw, or your band stretch. So I want that to be what they would call in the jargon of stretch 300% stretch, even though this rubber can do more. Now, you can stretch a rubber past its maximum elasticity. It'll just keep stretching. You're not getting any more energy in return for that. It's no longer pulling back. It'll stretch past, it's reached all the elasticity it can give you, and it just keeps stretching. So there's no point having these rubbers stretching huge phenomenal distances. You're not gaining anything from that, you're just busting your poo-poo valve trying to load it. Okay, so now we're working out what length and how I would work it out. This could be I could explain this slightly incorrectly, as I'm not the most educated person, but I'll try and do it in a way that it kind of makes sense. So I'm using a rubber that I want to stretch to 300%. So I want it to be 3 times its initial length here. So I want that to stretch to 3 times what this is. So I'm trying to work out what I needed to cut this at. So what I do is I take a bit of string, I take it from the roller back to the loading point, and then again to where it notches into the shaft, and now that bit of string is my overall draw. Okay, 300% is a nice easy one. I merely divide that by 3, which will give me the length of what 1/3 of it is. So 1/3 stretching out that amount 3 times the 1/3 is a whole this. If you're wanting it to be at 380%, all you're doing is merely changing the amount that you need to divide this overall length by, so that the length that's left is that percentage of the overall value. I really hope I've explained that correctly. If I haven't, send me a message and I'll try and make sense of it to you. But essentially, that is now 1/3 of this. So when this is loaded into the gun, which I'll show you now, and under pre-tension, it will stretch from its length now to 3 times that, or what they use in your spearfishing jargon, 300% stretch. Yeah, go on to pause. There's 1, there's 2. I shouldn't do this facing the window. So that's now stretched from here to there. That's your pre-tension. Now you stretch it the rest of the way, and then it is at, when it gets to its loading point, 300% of where it was. Hopefully I've explained that somewhat easily for you to understand. Every rubber will be slightly different, but that's how I work it out, so that I'm not wasting potential energy from that rubber. Okay, so rubber length has been decided upon and cut. The holes have been pre-lubricated like you saw in the how to use small bore rubber video, and now we're going to insert the loops into the small bore rubber. Preferably without stabbing myself, but hey, you never know. And remember, if at first you don't succeed, just try and try and try and try again. Eventually, you will get it in there. It is quite a small hole, quite a large knot.
It's time we all make a stand. Fight for our fellow man. We're coming on.
And once you've got it in there, remember to put a little bit of your silicone or whatever lubricant you were using around the outside where you're going to tie the knot, just to cut down on friction, and that way it won't actually cut into the rubber as you tie up your constrictor knot. Then tie up your constrictor knot, simple single constrictor knot if you want, double, all depends on what you prefer to do. I just use singles. Do it up as tight as you can physically and go from there. I like to tie 2 little loops, use a screwdriver to pull against each other, and then on this particular rigging bench I've got the vise done all the way up, then I hook 1 loop on the vise and put all my body weight down on the knot, just to make sure it's as tight as I physically can get it. And then, just like when you're washing your hair, rinse and repeat.
What if Martin Luther King was a Mexican? Would he march? Would he sing for his fellow immigrant man? Would he preach to the crowd? We should all have a meal. Turn your smile to a frown when he asked to be part of the deal. Oh my God, it's a brand new day with a whole new set of problems for us all. Oh my God, for us all. What if Jesus was a man in a factory?
So, first into the loops goes the catch cord. Now the catch cord is the one that's going to be in the notch or on the tab of your spear, and then catch on the roller head, stopping it from having your rubbers spinning all the way underneath, which makes it a lot easier to load. Your catch cord is usually made out of a very cut resistant or strong bit of Dyneema, that way the shaft doesn't wear it down as quickly. These knots I think I've shown you how to do before. This makes them easily changeable. As your catch cord wears down, you can always replace this bit without having to recut or tie bits into your rubbers. All the knot is it goes through the top of the loop, around the loop, and then between itself and the loop, so that as it tightens or pressure is pulled on it, the bit that's between itself and the loop cannot slide through. Now personally, I like to put little stopper knots on the ends as well. That just reinsures so that it doesn't ever pull through without permission. Okay, next we have to set the length for the catch cord. Now this is quite important. You don't want it to be too short that your rubbers are hitting the rails that catch it on, and you don't want it to be too long that your rubbers are rolling past the rollers down underneath. If they're too short and hitting on the rail, it'll cut the insides of your rubbers every time you fire. If they're too long and rolling back underneath, it'll cause a very large bang when it gets to the end of your gun, which will pull the back of your spear down, forcing the front of your spear up, causing you to shoot high all the time. So, now that we have the catch cord down at the bottom of the loops, still loose, sitting there, we're going to insert the pull cord into the top of the loops. Now, for the pull cord, all you have to do is burn a very large lump on the end. The hard plastic fibers will stop it when it expands and heats. Will stop it from pulling back through with that same standard loop knot that you're going in through, around the loop, and then between the line and the loop to keep itself tight as you pull. The pull cord doesn't need to be as strong as the catch cord, so I'll use a 4mm softer cord for that, just to make it easier on you. And once you're happy with how everything is sitting, tighten it up nice and tight, pull resistance on it, because you always want to check your knots as you're going, because the last thing you want is to get in the water, realise you may not have put one of the stopper knots on, and bling, start again. Okay, so now you got your muzzle end fixed, and you've gone and put your loops in the other end. You're ready to go. Now, there's two ways to do this with this system, probably a million more depending on how you do it, but we're just going to go through two of them today. The first one is if you're having an adjustable pretension and you've cut your rubbers a bit shorter than what I have for this gun. So I'll show you how to do that first, and then I'll go on to how I'll do it for this actual gun. You're going to tie off a bit of Dyneema to the small loop with an adjustable length on there, then tie some other loops with some bowlines so you can undo them, that will then hook onto the eyelets.
Counting on me, Congressman, won't you be a man? Fight for the working man too.
So once you've worked out roughly how long you want your bit of slack in your cord to be before the loop, you tie off your bowline. Now, you could use any other knot you want. I like bowlines because then I can change it again if I get it slightly wrong. And no matter how much you pull against a bowline, it's not going to come undone until you want it to come undone. And it's a nice simple knot. So hopefully you can see here how it's done. If not, look up on the wonderful world of YouTube how to tie a bowline, and you'll pick it up pretty quick. So once you've got your knot tied off and you're happy with the length, go ahead and repeat for the other side so that both of them are as close to the same length as you can get them.
So I went out and bought the machine that I thought was the best that money could buy. But lo and behold, well, I was told that the CEO of General Electric was none other than your congressman and mine. Well, that dirty, rotten guy. Well, Congressman, won't you be a man? Fight for the working man too. Just say no, don't just sell your soul.
Okay, so these can be as long or as short as you like, depending on what pretension you want to run and depending on what system you're using for deciding on the length of your rubbers. But by using these two knots, you can adjust them at either end as many times as you want until you're happy with how your gun is firing. Personally, I don't like this particular method as I believe it has a bit of wasted power. So what I will do is either attach another small loop to the small loops that are already in the rubber, or I will simply make larger loops for the tail end of the rubber and insert them and tie them off. Because I've already put the loops into this one, I'm just making some slightly larger loops that I'll be able to get around the eyelets, and then I'm going to loop them through themselves onto the smaller loops that are already in the rubber, and then use those larger loops to attach the rubber to the eyelets. So now I need to test it to make sure I have it at about the right tension. So what I want it to be doing is when I'm getting just to the notch, giving me its maximum amount of resistance, or stored energy. I don't want to be feeling that halfway down the barrel, and I don't want it to be still loose when I'm getting to the notch. Otherwise, I'm just wasting potential energy, or stretching the rubber past where it's going to give me any more performance. So now I'll show you how to do just a standard set of normal rubber without small bore, just anything you'd normally get off the racks, your normal everyday latex. So this is those larger knots you saw me doing at the start for the bridle. Pretty easy. It's essentially the same kind of thing. Pre-lubricate the hole, insert the bridle, tie off the knot, make it as tight as you can at one end, and then at the other end, insert a loop, tie it off, make it as tight as you can, hook it onto your gun. Very simple. So I'll do this one in fast forward, since you've already seen most of these things before, just in a slightly different way. And hey, it's always good to watch something repeated when you're learning something. Same as when you're practicing something. The more you do it, the better you'll get.
Well, we're headed out to the streets. We're gonna march on by to the beat. Little a new song sung for the boy broken down. All right, let me hear that mandolin just a little.
So these loops for the other end, I've merely made them out of a bit thicker cord, purely because it'll be easier for the man I'm making the gun to load, and they're just a standard figure-of-8 knot on the end again, nice and chunky so that they won't slip out. If you are worried about them slipping out, or you're using thinner cord, I'd recommend putting a bridle on there, or a brass ball, something along those lines, or doing a really chunky knot, just because with standard latex, the hole in the middle again, quite big, there's a lot of force on that hole, particularly with rollers, and if there's enough rubber between your knot and the constrictor knot, the knot inside and the constrictor knot, sorry, it'll still be able to pull itself through and pop out.
One people, one voice, one world, and a brand new life. I said, well, pull me another one before I go. Make it a whiskey and a cup of joe. Because me and my friends are gonna stay out all night long. Well, we're headed out.
Okay, so now we're back home, and we're going to rig this thing up the rest of the way, so attaching the shaft to the gun. Now, this one's using a small reel, so the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of this old manky 2mm braided line, which has done its job, but they're going to want to target more pelagic species on this trip, so I'm going to change it over to some 1.5mm Dyneema highly cut resistant line, just to give them a bit more length on the reel, as well as enabling me to then connect the Dyneema directly to the shaft, instead of having to have a bit of mono in the way. The reason I do this with the MVD roller heads, and not on pretty much every other gun that I have, is because of the way that the line holds the spear into the gun. If you're using mono or a more thicker type of Dyneema, or one that gets a really bad memory, it can actually get a kink where it wraps around the spike at the front of the gun. So, by using the decent Dyneema directly to the shaft, one that doesn't get a memory, it will not impede your shot in any way. Now, you'll notice about here I've realised I've actually spooled this onto the reel in the wrong way. So, it's a very important thing to keep an eye on when you're spooling a reel, and that is that you want the reel line coming off the reel the same way that the screw on the side undoes. This is incredibly important, and a lot of guns have been lost about this, and a lot of people have had some pretty close calls. If it's coming off the same way that the screw does up, so lefty-looty, righty-tighty, remember that thing? It's actually going to do your screw up, it's going to do your drag up, lock your reel off, and then you're in up shit's creek, no paddle. So, always very important to check that it is unspooling and undoing that screw at the same time. Massive safety thing, always be very sure. As you saw then, as soon as I realised I unspooled it and started again. Okay, now that you're all spooled up, you want to make sure you have enough line before you cut it off to allow for however many wraps of shooting line you're going to want. So, this particular one is going to be running a double wrap, which means I'm going to have to take it from the reel to the front of the gun, back to the reel, back to the front of the gun, back to the reel, back to the front of the gun again, to allow me to have enough line to go for all the wraps that the shooting line's going to need. Then tie it off to your spear. Okay, now we're going to attach it to the spear. So, always make sure it's running down parallel with the spear. You don't want it underneath or in any other way. That way, as your spear comes back out, it's going to come out with it. Now, to attach it to the spear, you take your line, put it through the hole. And now we're going to go back to one of the best and most useful knots there ever was, the bowline. This way, if your spear gets stuck, you can undo the bowline at your spear, pull the fish off the back of the spear, and do it back up. Now, again, if you need to know how to do a bowline, go to the internet, how to do a bowline. They're pretty straightforward. It's the whole rabbit in the hole, out the hole, around the tree, back through thing. So, I won't get into it in too much detail here today, but they're very useful knot. Once you've got that tied, and you allow enough length on that bit of cord that goes through your shaft up to the knot so that it can fit into the mechanism, you're good to go. Ready to shoot. And you just got to lock it in, make sure the neck's accepting it. It's not too thick, not too thin, and then you just got to do the rest of the wrap on the gun. So now we'll head up back up to the top and show you how to do the line wrap for an MVD roll ahead.
There's always been rich folk, there's always been poor folk. There ain't anything wrong with that. But now the rich spend their money on pills to stay skinny. Well,
So for the MVD, you're going to go down on the inside of the protruding spike. So first step, down on the inside of the protruding spike and underneath. Then wrap it over the outside of that protruding spike, over your spear, and then down on the inside of the protruding spike on the other side. This will then create a loop that holds your spear in place so it doesn't bounce around and move about when you're not wanting it to. Then, take your line down and around the line release, making sure you're clear of the reel on one side or the other. Depending whether you're left-handed or right-handed will probably help you choose that side. Then, over the loop at the front of the gun, back down, around the line release, and back up again. Then it'll run through the line guide and back to your reel. And you're all good to go. And there you have it. One rigged roller gun. With those two side mounting points, like I talked about in the last video, you can now see that it's all up and out of the way, not going to get tangled, not going to cause you any dramas. Your wrap's on, your spear's connected, everything's good to go. Now it's just time to go fishing and have fun. So, thank you for watching. Hopefully this hasn't been too long, but there was a fair bit of detail to go through. And if you have any more specific questions, feel free to send me a message and I can do another little clip on into more detail on specific points. But that's how easy it is, in theory. And hopefully this has helped you out.